Today we have a very special treat in that we have a special red and blue Mississippi panel with some political experts that really will kind of give us an outlook of what to expect in about a week and a half when people go to the polls here in Mississippi and across the nation for the presidential race.
And we will start with former Governor Haley Barbour.
Howard, Marcia Halford tells me you don't let her talk either. So I'm sorry. Not Marcia Halford anymore. I'm showing my age. At any rate, look, welcome. They've asked us to talk about the 2016 election. And I will first say to you, anybody that told you last year they knew how this was going to turn out will lie to you about other things. Howard mentioned I've worked in the White House when Reagan was president. Several months ago, I saw one of my old Reagan White House friends, and he said, "Haley, have you ever seen anything like this?" I said, "Nobody's ever seen anything like this, not in our lifetime." He said, "Yeah, the nominating contest has become so weird, they've had to coin a new term to describe it. Electile dysfunction." And I can't argue with that, and unfortunately Pfizer hadn't come up with anything. Look, why has it been so weird? Why has it been so unprecedented? I think that the short answer is people are mad and they're scared. How many of y'all know what Real Clear Politics is? Okay, a lot of you. Real Clear Politics is an aggregator of news. They write some stories, but essentially they're an online daily news aggregator that, among other things, runs averages of polls every day and have been doing this for a long time. According to Real Clear Politics average, 65% of Americans think the country's on the wrong track. That number's been above 60% for 3 years. It eases up to 70% sometime. And since fewer than 40% of Americans identify themselves as Republicans, this is not just about Republicans who don't like the Obama administration. These are many independents, many Democrats who think the country's going in the wrong direction. And the truth is, they got some good reason. We had a terrific recession, worst recession since the Depression. Yet we've had the weakest recovery after any recession since World War II. 2.1% average annual growth in GDP. When you consider that 3.1% has been the average growth in GDP since World War II, when you consider that the Obama administration's Office of Management and Budget predicted growth in GDP would be 3.9%, when you consider that after the last deep recession that ended in 1982, annual GDP growth averaged more than 4.5% for the 7.5-year period that corresponds to the 7.5 years since this recession ended. Think about what our country would be like if the economy was growing more than twice as fast as it has grown. President Obama is the first president since Herbert Hoover who will have spent his time in office and never had 3% economic growth in any single year. People can't cite those statistics, but they feel it in their own lives. They see it in their own communities. This economy has been great for Wall Street, but on Main Street, I don't have to tell you, you can't tell the difference between the recovery and the recession. People see it in their people trying to get jobs. You know, the administration says how great it is. The unemployment rate has dropped from 10.2% to 5%. What they don't tell you is almost all of that drop in the unemployment rate is because of people who've quit looking for jobs. The administration, every administration's labor department, has what's called the labor participation rate. Simply put, the labor participation rate is the number of adults who are either employed or seeking full-time work. What percentage of Americans? Well, If the labor participation rate was the same as it was when President Obama came into office, 67.3%, unemployment today would be 9.2%, not 5%. The rest of the drop is because of people who've dropped out of the workforce, because by the Labor Department rules, those people don't count as unemployed. They're not working, but because they're not looking, they're not counted as unemployed, which means 80% of the decline in the unemployment rate has been because of people who dropped out of the workforce, not because of people who've gotten jobs. Have there been net job gains? Well, they have. President Obama likes to boast about the fact that he's created 14 million jobs, or nearly 14 million jobs, in 7.5 years. After the last deep recession, 1982, in the same number of months, we created 21 million jobs. Half again more jobs in a workforce that was 20% smaller because of the population gains that have happened. I point out all that not because your constituents or your neighbors or your employees or your bosses can quote those statistics, but to make plain to you, people got a reason to be mad and scared. And the biggest manifestation of that in our party was Donald Trump. Millions of Republicans and Democrats and independents wanted to shoot Washington the bird. And they thought Donald Trump was the greatest, most magnificent middle finger they could imagine. But not just our party. Look at Bernie Sanders. We all thought this would be a cakewalk for Ms. Clinton. Bernie Sanders got 43% of the vote in the Democratic primaries. Interestingly, Donald Trump got 44% of the vote in the Republican primaries. The difference was essentially Clinton was competing against, Sanders was competing against just Clinton. Trump was competing against 16 other people. So I make the point to you, people got a right to be mad. The way it's manifested itself is not what I would choose. And frankly, a lot of Americans are disappointed. We have nominated the two most negatively perceived nominees of the two major parties in at least the history of polling. And I would suspect in the history of the country. We just didn't have polling before the 1930s and 40s. Trump has got a negative image among 61% according to the Real Clear average. Ms. Clinton, 53% according to the Real Clear average. This shows in the vote. So many of Americans don't have anybody they want to vote for. They're trying to decide who they're willing to accept because they want to vote against the other one worse. Since spring, I've been, as I make speeches around the country, making this point. If the election's about Trump, he's going to lose. If the election is about Clinton, she's going to lose. The big difference has been the Clinton campaign has spent the last 6 months trying to make the election about Trump. And Trump has spent the last 6 months trying to make the election about Trump. He's done virtually nothing to try to expand his vote. He plays to his base all the time. Yet, here we are with a pretty close election. And again, if polling is to be believed, and I think pollsters are having a harder time this year than usual, but I accept the polls at face value. 10 days ago, Hillary Clinton was ahead 6.7% in the Real Clear average of 13 polls. This morning, she's ahead 4.4 in the Real Clear average of the same 13 polls. I can't explain that, and I can't tell you that it's right. I can't tell you 6.7 is right or 4.4 is right, or the Los Angeles Times poll that shows Trump ahead is right. I don't know, but I do know this. One of the two of these people is going to be president of the United States come January. And my mama used to say when I was growing up, life's a series of choices. And the choice is Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. And that's the choice American people are going to have to make. Anybody who has done this a long time, saw William Winter out there, made me feel better about not being the oldest person here. Of course, he made me feel bad about not being the thinnest person here. But historically and normally, when 2/3 of the people think the country's going in the wrong direction, you have a change election. Hillary Clinton has spent this whole campaign trying to make the American people believe Donald Trump is unacceptable change. You may want change, but you don't want that change. Personally, after hearing Ms. Clinton in the primaries against Sanders essentially say she'd be a third term for Obama, and frankly has moved to the left of Obama on a number of issues, if you want change in this election, Hillary Clinton will never be the candidate of change. Hillary Clinton being the candidate of change would be like me being the spokesman for Weight Watchers. Just no credibility whatsoever. So that's the election that we're in presidentially. We got the Senate, we got the House, we got governors. But for openers about the environment, hopefully that's a good start.
Thank you, Governor. Now, Burns.
I've been friends now with Hillary for about a decade. And it was 10 years ago that we started, at that time, having a daily devotion, mainly scripture, sometimes poetry, a lot of readings from great theologians. But I would venture to say that we haven't missed a day in a decade of taking time to read some scripture together and have prayer. And so that's within the reference frame that I know Hillary and have the chance to work with her. Politics is my profession, but every once in a while you have this opportunity, many times in your career, to form lasting friendships. Do I think it's a done deal? I'll put it this way. My dad, who was sheriff of Grenada County, if any of us ever started thinking that we had won the campaign, he would immediately say, "Son, whoever told you I was winning, I tell you that I'm losing by 20, and get out that door and get to work. And let's go get elected." We'll know election night what happens. It's close out there, and there's a lot of things wobbling around, and it's just a totally surreal election. It's hard to read what's going to happen. I mean, look at what happened over the months in the in the Republican primary first, and then in the Democratic primary. And it's because, as Haley said, that we have a country that's frightened about the future, they're scared, and they're angry that government's not engaging in a way they want it to engage, that it's broken, that it's not getting anything done for them. And I hear that everywhere I go, with everyone I talk to, everyone I sit with, no matter which one they're voting for. You know, Trump's running as the ultimate outsider. He hates the Democratic Party. He hates the Republican Party. He hates the media. He's loud. He's a self-proclaimed billionaire from New York who is somehow an outsider. He would say, "Be damned with those who disagree. I can fix this, and I will fix it my way." We have a Secretary of State and former U.S. Senator, former First Lady on the other side, who loves policy to a point of talking you to death and back sometimes about how to solve a problem. She has a history as senator of working on compromise, and she does. And her work with Mississippi and Louisiana during Katrina was rather profound and deep and on the record. She would say, as an insider, which she doesn't deny, that being president would allow me the opportunity to achieve the goals I've been working on most of my life. And because I'm an insider, I know the way out. I know the way to get out. So you got two folks that are pretty different in style and personality and on the issues. And then you've got this whole, this whole cultural phenomena, maybe it's a moral phenomena going on where, I have two boys, one of them's still 12, one's 14, and I feel like I need a counselor with us during each presidential debate, just to talk about language, to talk about how you talk to each other, to talk about labels and some of the topics that have come up in these debates. I grew up with a debate as a sacred thing, watching with my father, and I've never missed one. I mean, they were really sacred in my home, and these debates, watching with my son, sometimes I cringe. I don't think a United States presidential debate should be that way. But that's what we have, and that's what we've been getting. I disagree often and loudly with Republicans, but at the end of the day, they're going to be my friends if they'll accept it. I was thinking about that when I was listening to Governor Bryant speak. I disagree with that guy 4 or 5 times a day, but I'll hug him till I mess his hair up if he'll let me. Well, he's a friend. He's a good guy. And that's not what we're getting right now in our national politics. And in my opinion, where we are is looking also what happens past Election Day. It's the one who wins going to immediately start working to pull us together, lead us forward. It's the person that loses. And y'all, this is crucial. I could take you to several history professors I had at Delta State that could talk in great detail about this. The loser is as important as the winner, because it's the loser in the American tradition that concedes and calls the country to come together around the new leadership. And that's always happened. And we face the chance where we're going to have a guy who's not willing to do that. And as citizens, we're all going to have to work hard, whoever wins, whatever happens, to bring our country back together. I think in Mississippi, I think there's enormous opportunities. I enjoyed listening to Governor Bryant at the good news going on. I think depending on who wins, I see opportunity in solar. I think that we should study and look at the whole vertical integration and where your businesses fit and how our government helps enhance the solar industry, because you could see millions and millions of dollars put into that. I think that I've always wanted Mississippi to get together and work to find its own Silicon Valley. The main streets and the storefronts of the little towns around here are just where these tech people are moving and where they're going. They're looking for places like this. And we sit in a state with Mississippi State, Ole Miss, USM, who all three are terribly strong and good universities and well known. For the first time in my 16 years in D.C., Governor Barber, I tell someone I'm from Mississippi, and often the first question I get is State or Ole Miss. I mean, the universities have really outdone themselves in the nation and in drawing attention and stature to themselves, and we should be very proud of that. And they have the ability to join if helped and aided and empowered by our leadership in Jackson to help build a technology corridor where people want to come, and including venture capitalism. Lastly, and just putting it straight up, is that we need to focus on education. And that's been said a million times, a million ways. One guy said, as I heard, that I want to see all of our children in Mississippi educated in a way that I know they can be. There's no reason Mississippi can't have the finest education for all kids, including poor and rural, in the nation. That was in 1967, and Governor Winter said that. And he's been saying it ever since. And I come home, or I look at the news, and I still see the same old thing, where we're fighting back and forth over the level of money being spent, and we have that crowd of people out there saying you can't throw money at education, we're overspending, we're wasting money on it. I always think about this old guy, evangelical from way back named G.K. Chesterton, who was a social critic of the day, and he never took a cigar out of his mouth, always smoking a cigar. He was from England, and he ran across a reporter one day on the streets over there. He had a cigar, and the reporter said, "Dr. Chesterton, when do you ever recognize the fact you may be smoking too many cigars?" And he looked at her and said, "When you see two of them in my mouth at the same time." And I think we are far from having access in our support and investment in public education. And I hope that we'll continue to make that fight and move in that direction. So Election Day is going to be quite the night. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to being on Twitter and seeing what everyone in Mississippi is saying. Watching Governor Barber, deal with it on TV. I'm going to find where you are, Governor, and watch. And let's remember that as that night goes on, that the next day we're one country and we're going to move forward together. Thank you. Thank you, Howard, and thank y'all for having me home.
Thank you, sir.
Let me just say how honored I am to be with Governor Barber, Howard, and Burns, and Bobby. It's good to see Governor Winter here. And I can't think of Governor Winter and people talking about their fathers, without thinking about my dad. Somebody came up to me when I walked in the door and said they knew my father, and the first thing I said was, "Wait, let me guess. He was a lot smaller and cooler guy than me, wasn't he?" And I could tell they agreed with me, but they didn't want to. But he was close to Governor Winter, and it's always good to see him. I've got to say, I worked for Governor Barber. I was his chief counsel. And people used to always ask me, what was it like working for Governor Barber? And in 30 seconds, I can tell you one example. When I had been working there for about 6 months, my father-in-law in Laurel had a mild stroke. And so I went to the governor one day when he was coming in from something, and I said, "Governor, would you mind writing my father-in-law a note? He had a mild stroke. I think he's going to be okay, but I bet he'd appreciate it." He said, "Sure, what's his name?" And I said, "Bill." And so I handed him the card, the pen, and he just bent over, there was a table there, and wrote it out without hesitation and handed it to me. And he said, "What do you think about that?" And I looked at it. It just said, it said, "Dear Bill, if Joe was my son-in-law, I'd have a stroke too." So I didn't know if he was just that quick on his feet or if that was the 50th time he had written a note like that. But it made my father-in-law feel better than any medical treatment I think he'd ever gotten. Look, I just want to mention a couple of things, and I'm going to try to be quick. Number one, I just want to say as a way of a reminder, because I think it's interesting to think about. We've already talked about the primary process, but one thing we didn't talk about is what were we hearing a year ago? Do y'all remember? A year ago, what we were hearing was the Republicans were going to fix the election, right? That the, quote, establishment, and I hate labels, we're going to get behind closed doors, change the rules, do whatever it was going to take to have somebody who got the vote not be the nominee. And I think that people who are part of the Republican Party or conservatives should be proud of the fact that we did exactly what our process says we should do. And that may sound simple, but it's not. Not in the environment that we had. And I will say this, and I'm not an expert on the Democrat part, but, you know, they have super delegates and some other things. And Bernie Sanders, you know, gave Hillary a run for her money. When your rock star is a socialist from Vermont, you know, in my opinion, things have moved a little bit left in your party. So we were happy about the way that worked out. Now, secondly, I want to say this. There hasn't been a lot of talk about the issues. Burns talked a little bit about it, but I mean with our candidates. And you know, Governor Barber mentioned the polls. Somebody may have mentioned this. I believe I just saw a Bloomberg poll that had Trump up 2 in Florida. He had things change, and I think if somebody would take his phone away, his polls would just start going up. I mean, my main message was that this has been an interesting political year, but it hasn't been, I think, as groundbreaking as a lot of people think. All the elections ends up getting more adversarial than we like. You know, a lot of times people get a little disenchanted, but you know, from a programmatic standpoint, our job was to analyze things. But from a Republican chairman standpoint, I wanted to try to let people know that this race is clearly within reach, and they better make sure if they're inclined to vote that way, they get out and actually vote.
I want to say there could be another surprise or two out there, but people would decide that I know there's one coming. But just as a voter, and based on there being different surprises every couple of weeks, you know, we could always, you know, face one, and we're prepared and ready and watching every day. And I think too, let me say this as well. I think too, as we get closer to an election, you know, the American people have always, they've focused in more. They become more serious thinking about who can best lead the country.